Yeah, hello everyone. So my name is Kieran. I am a third year medical student. I used to be the president of CamWAMS. I'm now an associate committee member, but I am the current Cambridge MedLife president. I have a lot of experience. So obviously I sat the BMAT myself, but since then I've worked as a tutor for the BMAT. I've even written some questions written a BMAT textbook. So I think I've got a pretty good understanding of the exam and how to use it and how you can do well in it. So the aim of this is I'm going to introduce you all to the BMAT because I'm aware not all of you may have seen questions. I'm going to talk you through a few questions. I'd normally ask you guys to do them, but we don't quite have time for that today. And then after that, we're going to talk about how to prepare. And then finally, we'll talk about how it's used. So let's get going. So what is the BMAT and who uses it? The BMAT is a 2-hour test with UK sittings in October. You might see some old resources talking about the August sitting, but I believe that has now been scrapped. And it's used by a variety of UK users for medicine, like 1 or 2 dentistry courses, and biomedical science at Oxford. The exam, you can see this is the up-to-date list of universities which use it. But I would note that Kiel and Manchester, it's only for international students. They use the UCAT otherwise. Obviously, the sort of big universities that use it, or not a big university, but the university that came up with it is Cambridge, and Oxford adopted it quite soon after. And as a result, it is fairly well adapted for the Cambridge course in theory, but not really in practice. It's divided into 3 sections. The first one is an hour long and it's 32 multiple choice questions. And that's about thinking skills. So you're not going to use any scientific concepts and you're not going to use anything more than relatively basic maths. Instead, it's about problem solving, taking in lots of information and synthesizing it, and critical thinking. So coming up with logical answers and looking at arguments and the strengths and weaknesses of them. Section 2 is 30 minutes and 27 multiple choice questions, and that is about your scientific knowledge / application of that knowledge. In theory, it's only about GCSE content, but we'll talk a bit more about how you can find the exact list of what's on the course later. And then section 3 is 30 minutes. It's 1 question. It's an essay task. It's 1 out of, I think you get to pick from 3 questions. And it gives you in quite a lot of depth. And you get a page to answer, and that's it. And the BMAT, I believe, is now back into a handwritten format, whereas it was previously online due to COVID. I believe they've now swapped back to handwritten due to some issues they had. So section 1 is roughly divided into 16 problem-solving questions and 16 critical thinking. Now, you may not know what the difference between a problem-solving and a critical thinking question is, but I'll try and show you some of them, and hopefully that will make it clear. And you will see when you do past papers that in previous years, section 1 included questions which tested your data analysis skills. And that would be quite a long passage of written text with some stats thrown in there. And it would ask you to figure out things from those questions. Those are no longer in the course. Do not bother doing them. They were quite hard, which I think is part of why they were removed. You don't need to know how to do them anymore. So when you're practicing, if you see a question like that, just don't bother. Yeah. Problem solving questions, you can sort of summarize them into 3 types, but actually there's a large variety within it. So here's a fairly straightforward one. And if you guys want to have a go at this now, be my guest, but I am going to talk through it quite quickly just so we finish on time. So this one is called relevant selection. As a multiple choice question, you can give one of these answers from A to E. And the immediate thing you need to do is look at this and think, okay, we're looking who qualifies for a bonus. So notice it says a bonus. It doesn't say the £1,000 bonus or the £500 bonus. A quick skim of this shows that the £500 bonus, so absences must be less than 10%. In the £1,000, it's less than 5%. Production targets must be met. In the £1,000, they must be exceeded. Rejects are less than 8%. In this, it must be less than 5%. So there's no scenario in which someone gets £1,000 bonus but doesn't meet the criteria for a £500 bonus. So essentially, this whole bit of text is irrelevant. It does not add anything to your knowledge of the question. So you can ignore it completely. So next things next, you can look at this. Now there's two ways of working through this table. You could either say, does Smith, does Smith meet the target? Does Jones meet the target? So on and so forth. Or you could go, who meets the target for attendance? Who meets the target for production? Who meets the target for rejections? Also notice here, they're asking about absences. So if absences are less than 10%, attendance must be over 90%. And also, again, it says less than, it says less than, I'm just getting rid of all that. It says less than. Less than means it must be higher than 90%. So Jones is not getting a target, a bonus. Because Jones is not getting a bonus, you can rule out this answer. Next thing, you could check, is Patel getting a bonus? Or, you can go, well, okay, everyone else meets the attendance criteria. Then if you want to look at production targets met, well, all of them meet targets except for McKay, but McKay is not even on the list, so not a huge surprise. Finally, look at rejections. Rejects are less than 8% of output. Well, that means this number must be greater than 92, because 100 minus 8 equals 92. So the answer is Smith, Patel, and Uwalalu. So the answer is D. And that's quite a straightforward question. And there's lots of ways of approaching it. So a large part of practicing for both this and the UCAT, which we're not going to talk about today, but is quite similar, is about finding efficient ways to solve these problems. So the next question, there are 3 thermometers, each accurate to within 2 degrees above or below the temperature they actually read. One reads 7 degrees, one reads 9 degrees, and one reads 10 degrees. And then it wants you to know what is the minimum range in which the true temperature lies. Now, this is quite a counterintuitive question. And I think if you just look at it, it's quite possible you get it wrong. So all of these thermometers are accurate to within 2 degrees above or below the temperature. So the actual temperature has to be one which fits within the range of all 3 of these. So perhaps the easiest way to show is to work out the range for each one individually. So for 7, it's 5 to 9. For 9, sorry, it's meant to be a 7. 7 to 11. And for this one, 8 to 12. And so from that, you can very quickly go, okay, well, the lowest number, which is within all 3 of these ranges, is 8. So that is the minimum. The highest number is 9, which could be. So the true temperature must be between 8 and 9 degrees. And that's the answer. But actually, if you were a bit smarter and you're feeling a bit more efficient, then what you could do is you could go, well, if we're looking at the minimum range, it's going to have to be the highest number. It's going to have to be the highest number, which is true for this one, as the maximum. And the highest number, which is true for that one, is 9 degrees. And the lowest number, which is true for that one, which is the minimum, which is going to be 8 degrees. And in that way, you've actually shaved off a good minute, or maybe not a minute, maybe a bit less, but you've shaved off quite a lot of time. And that's a fairly large part of this, is that the more you practice, the more efficient you'll get. Finally, here we have quite a hard question, and there's a lot of information on this page. And this is, I would say the first one's quite easy. The second one is more standard difficulty. This is quite hard. So this one, you need to infer quite a lot of information. And this is a lot to look at. But actually, when you boil it down, key bits of information are not too bad. The first thing, and the most important part, is that number of customers per hour, so the number of customers over a number of hours, was the same for 5 of the days, so all days shown, except for Tuesday and Friday, which was slightly higher. And then it shows you the opening hours, and you can just very quickly work it out that this is 10 hours, this is 12. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah. This is 12, this is 10, this is 10, this is 6. And then you can also work out how many opening hours each of these is, but we'll talk about that in a second. So if you look, first things first, Friday has the exact same number of and then you've got this graph, which is total number of customers per day. Now, it doesn't give you any units, so you can't actually sit down and do the maths and work out the exact numbers. Instead, you have to approximate. And the BMAT is a non-calculated paper, so you have to do a lot of approximation. So I would recommend that you get used to rounding in ways that won't mess up your final answer, ideally. And you get used to doing mental maths, which will all come more naturally to you the more practice you do. But okay, first thing you can do is you notice that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, exact same total number of customers. Now, Thursday and Saturday, it was open for 10 hours, but we know the average number of customers per hour on Friday was higher. So from that, we know that on Friday, it must have been open for less than 10 hours. And that, if you work out the total number of hours it's open, you rule out this and this. Now that's quite quick and has boiled you down to a 1 in 3 choice. There's no negative marking on the BMAT. If you get a question wrong, you don't lose any marks. So there's no reason not to guess. And if you were in a rush, maybe you could just very quickly go, well, it's not that, and guess one of the other 3. The other day is Tuesday. And I think the best way of doing it is you can say, okay, Tuesday is 3/4 of Monday. On Monday, it was open for 10 hours. If Tuesday had the same average number as Monday, it would have to be open for 7.5 hours. But we actually know it has a higher average number of customers per hour, so it must be lower than 7.5. So actually rule out these 2. And from that, you get your answer as E. That's quite a full-on question. And a big thing in the BMAT is time management. When you do your GCSE or your A-level exams, the vague idea is that for each paper, it will be easier questions at the start and harder questions at the end. The aim is to get you as many marks as possible. That is not true for the BMAT. There may be very easy questions tucked away at the end of the paper. There may be very hard questions at the start. If you are stuck on a question, mark it, move on. And that's something you need to get used to doing. Okay, we're going to rush through these, but these are critical thinking questions. You're shown an argument and you're asked to identify either a main conclusion, a flaw, find another argument that uses similar logic. Now, finding the main conclusion is normally quite simple. You're looking at a paragraph and you're working out, okay, if vegetarian, and you're working out what is it trying to convince you of? What is this main paragraph trying to tell you? So this starts by saying vegetarian food can be healthier than a traditional diet. It then gives some data that backs that up. Researchers have shown vegetarians less likely to suffer from heart disease and obesity. It then gives a counter argument. However, it then immediately further counters that argument. So I would say the overall conclusion is A. Now, in this question, it's been very nice. It's put the main conclusion as the first sentence, and every other sentence clearly leads back to it. But if you did get a bit confused, there are other ways in which you can work it out. Essentially, if say you were tossing up between A and E, think which strengthens the other. So E is evidence that strengthens A. Therefore, A is much more likely to be the main conclusion. So same goes for B. Whereas A, in relative to E, doesn't really provide evidence for E. It would, if anything, just restate it. Yeah. It's not a super easy thing to see, but you get more of an eye for it. Now, this one, we've probably not got time for. It's quite straightforward, so I'm going to move through it. Oh, no, okay. Well, yeah. All critical thinking questions are based around argument analysis and essentially just staying logical. Now, it may be that they are using an argument that you do not agree with, or that they are using an argument that you think is kind of silly. But if it is logical, then it is probably right. So you've got to remember, common sense is not really relevant here. You're looking purely at the logic and purely at the evidence they give you. Okay. So we've really rushed through that, but we've got to get going. So section 2 is 30 minutes, and it's 27 multiple choice questions, 7 on biology, 7 on chemistry, 7 on physics, and 6 on mathematics. You're looking for speed and accuracy, because you need to do a question every minute. The specification, is roughly GCSE knowledge. However, some of it may be stuff that you did not cover at GCSE, depending on your exam board. However, if you go on the BMAT website, there is amazing resources. And there is firstly, there is the full specification saying exactly what you need to know. And I've copied some pages from it here. But actually, secondly, there is essentially a workbook which takes you through every single topic and teaches it to you. It's completely free. It's on their website. It's under section 2 preparation. I cannot recommend it enough, especially if you don't do physics, which I know a lot of people don't do. A lot of it will be unfamiliar to you. You can relearn it quite easily with the help of that. I haven't included any questions from this, but often these questions will, so for biology, they might just be more understanding based, but especially for physics and maths, they're going to be, simple stuff because it's only GCSE, but actually in an unfamiliar or a tricky way. And you still need to do some problem solving. And again, practice, practice, practice. But we'll talk more about how to do that in a second. And then section 3. So you do 1 essay from a choice of 3. You may see that in previous years there were 4 essays. That's because veterinary students used to sit this exam, and therefore there used to be an essay about animals that has since been scrapped because vets no longer sit this exam. You can make notes on question paper, and the answers are limited to 1 A4 page. So because of that, it is worth thinking about handwriting size. It is worth thinking about how much you can write, but also most people are not going to be writing a huge amount. You have to be very concise. And it's also, you need to plan ahead and think very clearly, what am I going to write where? So each question is formatted like this. This is actually the paper from my year. So, and this is the question I did. So it starts with an individual statement. Sometimes it's a quote, but normally it's stating something. Teamwork is more important for surgical innovation than the skills of an individual surgeon. It then asks you to explain the reasoning behind this statement, argue that the skills of individual surgeons are more important for surgical innovation or progress, and to what extent do you agree with the statement? So pretty much always it is going to ask you to do, firstly, explain the reasoning behind it, explain what is meant, essentially argue for the statement. Then it's going to ask you to argue against the statement. And then it's going to ask to what extent do you agree? And you receive 2 scores for this. The first score is about the quality, and that is scored from 1 to 5, where 1 is low and 5 is high. The vast majority of people score around a 3. A small group of people will score higher. It is very hard to get 5, but it is possible. However, normally, well, we'll talk about that in a second. And there's a mark scheme here, and you'll see it's quite familiar with the stuff you use at GCSE English, where it doesn't say explicitly include these points to get the marks, but it does say, if it's reasonably well argued, so on and so forth. Then or if it's a good answer, or if it's an excellent answer. The thing I would say is that you'll notice to get above a 2, all aspects of a question must be answered. And what that means is that you must address each of these 3 key points. Even if you write the most incredible essay on the planet, if you do not clearly address those 3 points, you will not score higher than a 2. Because of that, I cannot stress enough the importance. I would strongly recommend, firstly, that you do a paragraph on each point, which is clearly about that point. And I would just absolutely make sure that they are clearly addressed, okay? And if you do that, you've made no major logical errors. and you've come up with some arguments in favor, and arguments can be, you know, hypothetical situations and things like that. If you want, you will get a 3. It is not, if you know what you are doing, it is not an exceedingly hard paper to get a 3 on. You do not need to worry about having flowery language or anything like that either. You know, they're not scoring you for your linguistic ability. They're scoring you for the coherence of your argument and the evidence you give to back it. Now, to score higher points, better reasoned arguments will increase your score. Using a more balanced analysis, or perhaps integrating your essay better in the conclusion, can also pull up your score. You can use historical examples, especially, so this one's obviously very specific. So I had, before I start my essay, I'd read a book about like the history of medical innovations, and I gave the example about, I think it was the development of the laparoscope or something. And that actually allows you to, and if you can bring in historical examples, that's an amazing thing to do. A word of warning, however, BMAT examiners are paid per hour. Your GCSE examiners were paid per paper. They have incentives to go through as quickly as possible. Your BMAT examiners go per hour. As a result, they can fact check you. They will take the time to fact check you. Now, if you make a minor error, you know, if you say that IVF was discovered in 1962 and it was developed in 63, they're not going to mind. But if you just make something up or you get something completely wrong, then you're getting a 2 or even a 1. So just, if you mention historical or if you mention real things, make sure there is some basis in fact. There's an example here. The main thing I'd suggest is just plan thoroughly before you start writing. You have half an hour, you can take at least 5 or 10 minutes, and then just get it down as quickly as possible. Yeah. Okay, we have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to talk about how you prepare for the BMAT and how it's used. So firstly, you need to register for the BMAT. For those of you in year 12 who are applying sort of at the more standard time, your school should do that for you, but check. I've heard horror stories of people applying to Cambridge and their school forgetting to register them. Your school should give you some paperwork to fill in before the exam, sometime, I think, in September. If they do not, make sure that you talk to your school's exam officer and make sure you are registered. If you are not in year 12, if you're in year 13, you're reapplying, or if you're at a later stage in life, or you're just coming from a slightly non-traditional background, again, you must make sure you are registered. You can find test papers on their website. They have full instructions, but if you're not registered, you can't sit it, and there's a firm deadline. Secondly, review the specification, especially for the scientific knowledge. You've probably forgotten some of it since GCSE. Even if you do maths, chem, bio, and physics, there will be some things you have not covered since GCSE. Brush up on them. And then thirdly, you want to practice. Finally, pardon me, you want to practice. So you can ignore this completely. That's out of date. But now for the BMAT, yeah, your school should be a registered test center. This all should be fine, but you just need to make sure it's happening. They have very clear instructions on their website. Check out their website for more details. The specification, as I mentioned, is on their website. They have a really good guide to the curriculum. Make sure that you go through it and you know all of it. It will get you a lot of marks. Finally, you want to brush up on, brush up on your scientific knowledge through the guides they've produced. It will help a lot. And then practice. So if you're doing the UCAT, which I would assume most of you are, it's kind of similar skills for a lot of it, but it's still worth practicing for the BMAT. I would strongly suggest that you do at least a couple of practice papers, but you can do more. You do not need to buy anything for the BMAT. I did not buy anything for the BMAT and I did very well. I know many other people who did not buy anything for the BMAT and did very well. They have past papers going back to 2003, and there are specimen and sample papers with explained answers. Section 1 has been slightly updated, but actually it's mostly the same. Section 2 content has changed, but they normally mark on the past paper where a question is, which would no longer show up. Yeah, and then section 3 has changed slightly. Section 3, people often say, is the hardest to practice, but you can have a teacher look at it. You can have someone mark it. There's quite a few options available. And I would make sure that you practice under timed conditions, because the time pressure is just as much a part of the assessment as any other as the actual exam itself. Yeah. And similarly, ask people, practice section 3 under time conditions. And I would say practice section 1 under time conditions too. You can struggle with the time on that. There's a bunch of extra resources on here, but if you Google BMAT resources, there's loads of free stuff. Check out the BMAT website. It's absolutely top notch. Yeah. And then finally, so BMAT, the first 2 sections of BMAT are scored from 1 to 9, 1 being low, 9 being high. If I haven't included these, but you can look on their website and can see the graphs. Essentially, a very small amount of students. So the average score is a 5, and every year the average score is designed such that it is a 5. The vast majority of candidates will fall within the 4 to 6 range. Now, obviously, if the average of your first 2 sections is above 6, or is between 5 and 6, that's very good. You have a very reasonable chance of getting in. Even if it's in 4 to 5, again, you have a very reasonable chance of getting in. And I wouldn't worry. Obviously, it's going to depend on each college, but a good essay, or pardon me, a good interview, more than capable of pulling it back up. If it's above 7, that's exceedingly good. Very well done, you. But a bad interview can still track it down. You can be confident, but you still need to perform well. And if it's 8 or above, absolutely go you. Well done. That's incredible. If it's below 4, you are going to struggle. It's not the be all and end all, especially if you had a bit of a bad day. It does happen. But ideally, I would say you want to be scoring above a 4. It is only one piece of information. As I'm sure the admissions tutors we've got coming will mention, there are lots of different pieces of information that Cambridge uses. Some colleges might favour the BMAT more than others, but it's almost impossible to know as an applicant. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. And, if you get a bad BMAT, but you have incredible GCSE results, predicted grades, teacher references, interviews, you are very likely to still get an offer. It is one of many pieces of information. So do not stress about it. Yeah. So I think that is, actually, we've still got a few minutes, so I can sort of say some more things. Generally, the guidance is that colleges care less about section 3. That's probably not completely true, but certainly for section 3, the distribution of grades is very heavily skewed between 2.5 and 3.5. A small number will get 4, an incredibly small number will get 4.5 and 5. There is also, you are given a grade on the basis of your English. That is a letter grade. A is good. Then there's a C, an E. I think about 80% of students get an A, generally due to the, if you are an English language native speaker, and you sort of have some basic experience writing, you did well at GCSE English, you should be fine. If you're not, maybe, do some practice, but the vast majority of candidates get an A. Handwriting can let you down. So if you are someone with messy handwriting, it might be worth asking firstly, could you do the exam on a laptop? But secondly, if you can't do the exam on a laptop, spending the time to make sure that your handwriting is legible. And I would generally recommend that. Well, I recommend everyone make sure the handwriting is legible, which I'm sure the examiners will be very grateful for. So yeah, good luck, everyone.